Hey friends, it's Simon Hurley and welcome to a brand new video. Now today I'm going to be sharing one of Altenew's new amazing releases, and we're going to be really focusing in on the stencils to create some really amazing texture and dimension on your cards. So without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so today I'm using a new release from Altenew, and I'm starting off with this tea for two stamp set. I really like this one because my family is big tea drinkers, so I'm excited to make a card with it. I started off by taking one of the teapot stamps, and I'm going to stamp it down using some jet black archival ink onto some stark white cardstock. This is nice and waterproof, so later if I use any water, it'll be nice and solid. Now I'm going to go in with the coordinating stencils that go along with these images that you can buy separately from Altenew. And I'm also going to use the Dye Motifs Stamp Set, but you can also go in with any background stamp or anything to replace this. It's just a fun pattern. I'm going to go in and use that stencil, lay it over top of the image to mask off the rest of the cardstock, and then I'll take one of the tie-dye stamps with my Simon Hurley Create inks and stamp it down onto the mug. The stencil is going to make sure that it doesn't stamp in any other place, and then it'll stamp the design right onto the teapot. Now the stencil is a little bit thick, so you'll have to apply just a little bit of pressure to make sure that it stamps edge to edge, and then you get that really awesome tie-dye design in there. Now they fit a lot of different images on here, so if you need to, you can also tape down the areas to make sure that you don't get any outside of the area, but I love that this stencil kind of easily masks it off. I'll then do the same with some of the other tie-dye patterns and fill in with other colors. So here I used Midnight Snack, now I'm using Sidewalk Chalk, and I also went in with a little bit of Over the Moon for a light yellow color, and I really liked how all those blended together. And I like that you can kind of take those tie-dye patterns and rotate them and turn them to fill all the colors in and create this really fun tie-dye effect. Now I also wanted to go in with my blending tools, so I took my blending tools with the same colors that I used. Here I went in with a little bit of Sidewalk Chalk and blended that in from the edges, which just adds a little bit of color in there and dimension to the image. And once I'm done blending that in, there's also all of the other different areas of the teapot and some of the other teapots from the stamp set to color in, so I'll just move it over to the base of this one, blend that out, and also the lid as well. Now I like that it comes with the stencil to color things in because it saves a lot of time and gives you a really awesome ink blended color. I don't know about you guys, but I think ink blending is really a fast and easy way to add color down, and if you struggle with watercolor, this can be a really great way to go. So now I'm going to take the dye for that teapot and run it through my die cutting machine to cut that out, and then we'll start on the background. Now I used some of those tie-dye kind of striped images from that stamp set, and I'm going to just stamp them down in a little bit of woof ink all the way down the card. This is going to add a little bit of texture and dimension to that background, but it's not going to take away from the teapot because we're keeping it nice and tone on tone with the grays. Here, by going in with the separate different lines, you have different textures and effects, and I just stamped them in between each other to get a really cool pattern. You can totally use any background or pattern or stencil for this. I just wanted to share how to use more of those images from that really fun tie-dye stamp set. To finish that off, I'll go in with a scalloped oval die to add a little bit of texture to that background. So I'll just tape it down front and center and run that right through my die cutting machine to cut it out. I just love the bit of texture and interest that adds, and then I'll add the teapot down front and center using some foam tape, and then I needed a sentiment. And I love the different kind of tea puns and sentiments they had in this stamp set. I ended up choosing the one that says sending you positivity, and I stamped that down with some clear sticky ink and white heat embossed it. I just love that, and I think it'll be a great sentiment to send to anybody, and this was super fun to get those awesome tie-dye motifs inside of that teapot using the stencil. For the next card, I'm going to use the Scalloped Ornaments Stamp Set and the stencil to share how to get some really awesome shading on an already layering stamp set. I think this is a really great tip to get some awesome texture and dimension. So I'm going to take one of the large images from this stamp set and stamp it down using some jet black archival ink onto another piece of stark white cardstock. I love the detail in these images, but you can use anything that has these solid areas in it as well. So it has a bunch of different layers in this stamp set that you can stamp right over top. So I went in with some Simon Hurley Create inks in a bunch of different colors. Here I used Bee Sting, Slippery and Wet, and I also went in with Tropical Tango to really easily add color to the image. Now I love that they have these in here, so if you don't want to watercolor or do anything difficult, the stamping is really simple. Then to add a little bit more shading, I went in with these detail blender tools from Altenew. These are little tiny blender brushes that make it really easy to add color and shading. I use foam ones just similar to this from Ranger, but I also like that these are brushes, so in case if you're a little bit foam challenged, this is a great option for you. So I went in with the stencil that you can buy along with this stamp set to really coordinate and color things in easily. And I'm going to just go in and add a little bit of shading using one shade darker from the Simon Hurley Create range. And then here's a really big difference. I brought in a little bit of Game Over and went in onto that red flower and added just a little bit of shading from the center of those petals. This was a really drastic change, but it just adds a lot of dimension onto the stamp. And instead of just doing it in one layer, the shading really allows the ink to be layered up and get this beautiful shaded effect. So I wanted to share that. These stencils are super helpful and fun, and I also love that these blending brushes are easy to add color down. It still is going to be like any blender brush where you do have to kind of layer up the color a little bit, but again, there's no harsh marks, so if you are into that, this is a really awesome tool for you. And then here is a closer look at that blending all complete. I just love all of the amazing detail and dimension that it adds right onto the stamping. Then I went in with one of the new embossing folders. This one has some really beautiful vines on it, and I wanted to share a little mistake of mine, but also a cool technique. I went in with sidewalk chalk and put it all over one side of the embossing folder. Then I'll place my cardstock into that side and fold it over and make sure that nothing shifts as I run it through my die cutting machine. So once that's all embossed, it'll impress the color into there and give a really cool background with color in the background and some white embossed images. I just think that is stunning. But I thought it was a little bit too bold for today's card, so I ended up just going with a more simple white version of that. It just keeps it nice and simple and adds some texture, but I still wanted to share that mistake and my kind of change along the way. In case if you do want to add ink into the background, it's a fun technique. Now for the sentiment, I decided to go for this half-tone circles stamp set. I love that thanks sentiment, so I'm going to be using it on today's card. I just went in with that, and I'm going to stamp it down using some clear, sticky embossing ink. I went in with some Versamark, and then I'm going to go in and heat emboss it with some white embossing powder. Then I quickly heat set that until it was nice and shiny, and that gives some great contrast on today's card. Now for this sentiment, I ended up going in with my Fiskars Spring Assist scissors and leaving just a little bit of a border all the way around it. I like to kind of fussy cut around sentiments like this, that way it's not just a big rectangle and it takes up less of the card so that more of the card can be shown and not be taken up by the sentiment. So there is the finished card once it's all complete. I love that shading on top of the stamped coloring, and that easy white embossed background makes for some beautiful texture. For the next technique, I wanted to use this beautiful Scalloped Flowers 3D embossing folder. I love this, and I wanted to share a really easy coloring technique using just this. So I went in with the one side of the embossing folder. Here I ended up using the raised side because I knew that the ink would stick really nicely to the details. So I went in with my Simon Hurley Create inks, starting off with a little bit of bee sting, and just used kind of the corner and the edge of my ink pad to add a little bit of color and dimension. Then I went in with a lighter color and did the exact same thing, but here I added it to the edges of the petals so that it gives it shading in the center and a lighter color at the edge. I'm doing the same thing all around. Here I did a fun purple flower. Here I added a little bit of Prom Queen, and just by, applying a little bit more color of that lighter color and then just touching it to the surface, it'll kind of catch on those 3D areas and give you a darker color there and then a lighter color everywhere else. So here you can see I filled it in with Psych for the leaves. Then I went in with Tropical Tango with a lighter pressure, which will just glide across the surface and just hit the most raised areas. Now if I got ink anywhere where I didn't want it, I can easily wipe it off with a rag before I put it through my embossing folder. So there I'm going to wipe off any ink that I don't want, and then I'll end up spraying that down, placing my paper down in the exact spot that I want it, and pressing my color all down onto the cardstock. Held it in there to make sure that it didn't move and stayed in place, and then I ran it through my die cutting machine. When I pull it out, you get all of that really awesome texture. It creates a debossed image, and then it impresses all of that amazing ink color into there. So there you can see by adding that lighter color down and then a little bit of that darker color, you get some really awesome shading and dimension, and it was super easy to make this card. So if you want to mass produce cards or do a really fun design, this is an easy one to pull off. I just stamped down a sentiment that said, "You make me smile," and I think it really finishes this one off nicely. The focal point is just that 3D embossing folder, which totally shines. Alright, I hope you guys really enjoyed that video. If you did, leave a comment down below letting me know which card was your favorite, and also give this video a big thumbs up and click subscribe and ring that little bell icon next to the subscribe button to be notified every time I post a brand new video like this one. Alright guys, I'll see you very soon. Have a great day. Bye!